Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. As difficult as the world seems right now, there's a silver lining to just about everything. And one of the silver linings that I see right now is that with so much adversity and so much evil in this world, it gives each and every one of us an opportunity to rise above it, to risk, to fight for the good. And that's not an opportunity that comes when times are good. When society is great and peaceful, there's no enemy at the gates, there's no demons inside the castle wreaking havoc. You can't really prove yourselves. You can't really show the world or show God, more importantly, where your soul is at. But right now, we can, because stepping up and speaking out comes at great risk, whether it's getting your social media deleted because you're sharing misinformation online, losing a job, having family stop talking to you, a number of things. So my guest today is a man named Eithan Haim, who is fearless. He is a surgeon that saw something very worrying. So he was working, doing his residency at one of the, actually, I think the largest children's hospital in the world that was in Texas. And they had made these announcements that they were going to stop doing any kind of transgender treatments, surgeries, etc. Yet he saw behind closed doors and secretly they were still continuing to do this. And so he risked everything and came forward anonymously at first as a whistleblower exposing this. His story then blew up. It helped some significant laws in Texas to be passed, and it seemed like everything was great until the HHS and the FBI started coming after him. And not just him, his wife, interviewing people surrounding him. And so now he's embroiled in a very massive lawsuit, not just to defend himself, but to go after those that are committing this wrongdoing and coming after him for really stepping up and having a conscience. So folks, please enjoy the interview. Eithan, it is a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to join with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Really, it's a privilege to be here.
Absolutely. So we unfortunately live in an age here in America where the federal government has been weaponized against us, we the people. But it's not just like what you've seen in previous totalitarian regimes where they're coming after you for, spreading misinformation or propaganda or these kinds of things. This is where we have our federal agencies have adopted a very radical agenda. And they're going after people that are opposing or exposing that agenda. So it's not really about what it used to be, where it's just the basic, if someone's going against the Iron Curtain, they're going to get caught and found out. This is much more sinister, I'd say, in many ways. And so you're someone that I would say risked your career and so much to come forward as a whistleblower with, I think, what is some really important information, which I'll let you kind of detail. But then you witness the weight of the federal agencies and the DOJ coming after you for it. So I'll go ahead and just hand it over to you to introduce yourself and to tell your story. And I'll jump in at different points to ask you questions, but you've got a really important story that needs to be told.
Yeah, so it's exactly like that. What makes us different from other times in history is that it's simply the act of telling the truth about what is obvious to a lot of people. And once you do tell the truth, you're living in a dangerous place in history when those who are in charge will do anything to go after those people who tell the truth. And I think that's what my story is mainly about, because I'm just a regular person. I grew up in Florida. I have a brother and sister, great parents. My dad is a doctor. I saw how much his profession meant to him and how much his patients cared that he was their doctor. So I wanted the same thing for myself. So I went to undergrad in Florida, medical school there, but then I was able to do my general surgery residency training at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. And one of the best surgical training programs in the country, right? You had all these massive developments there in terms of heart surgery, trauma surgery. That's where everything happened. That was like the center of surgery. So it was amazing to be there. And I was just a resident at the time that this whole story starts. And for those people who are unfamiliar, a resident is what you are after medical school when you're training in your chosen specialty. So for me, that was general surgery. It's a 5-year program. The academic center I was at was Baylor College of Medicine. but we're affiliated with multiple hospitals that we train at. So one of them is Ben Taub, the big trauma center. You have St. Luke's, which is a great tertiary care hospital for cancer and things like that. But then one of the hospitals we spent the most time at is Texas Children's Hospital, the biggest children's hospital in the world. And I started my training in 2018. And I was able to see all these shifts take place after COVID started in 2020, where I saw everyone in my profession bend the knee to ideology and censorship. And things were bad during COVID, but I didn't think it could possibly get worse. But of course, as is consistent with our times, it did get worse. So I believe it was the changes that happened during COVID that led to the proliferation of the transgender ideology. Before 2020, it was kind of this thing you kind of saw on the periphery of society, right? There was that show, I Am Jazz, but no one really thought it was a mainstream thing. I mean, not many people really cared about it. But then afterwards, you saw these clinics popping up in Washington, in Oregon, in California, New York. You saw accounts like Libs of TikTok documenting how it's becoming pervasive in society. And you think it's happening in states like California and Oregon, but never in Texas and not at the hospital that I was working at. And I was dead wrong. But the story starts in March of 2022 when the hospital, Texas Children's Hospital, had said that they were shutting down their transgender program because of the legal risks. They had sent out that statement to a bunch of local news stations, right, to indicate that they were shutting down the program. But the reason they were doing it was because a few weeks before, the Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, had issued an opinion saying that it could be investigated as child abuse. So kind of makes sense why they would release that statement. They want to make sure that they can cover themselves, make sure there's no legal liability, as they said in their statement. So I was there. I did surgery there, and I knew categorically that this was a lie. But I knew this was untrue because the people who were doing these surgeries on kids who believed they were transgender told me they were still doing it, right? They told me about these kids who were 11, 12, 13 years old, who had all these psychiatric problems that were going unaddressed, how they were implanting puberty blocking devices into their arms. And this was after this statement where they said they were shutting down the program. So what they told the public was one thing, but behind closed doors, they just continued it and expanded it.
Can you detail what are some of these surgeries? People hear, okay, a 12-year-old, having transgender surgery. What are some of the ones that are like I'm not saying like the details of how it works, but like what goes on with if a 12-year-old's coming in and having this operation done, what does that typically entail? What are the different types that could be done?
Yeah, so this is surgery that I've done before, but on kids who have something called precocious puberty, which is an actual hormonal issue that's diagnosable, it's measurable, where you have a 6 or 7 year old kid who begins developing signs of puberty because they have an overactive area in their brain that starts pumping out these hormones. So it's used in that disease, precocious puberty, to implant a small device into their arm in order to shut down this process that's pathological until the onset of puberty, at which point they stop the medications, go on to get natural puberty. So it's like a minor surgery. You just make a small incision in the arm, insert the device. But in this case, they were doing it for kids who believe they were transgender. And a lot of people, they kind of see puberty blockers as like a middle ground, right? It's not as severe as the mastectomies or the vaginoplasties. But I would actually strongly disagree with that because there's no surgery in the world that can cause a child's bones become that of like a 65-year-old woman, right? Where they make them brittle. There's no surgery in the world that can induce a child to become menopausal because that's what these puberty blockers do. Because the changes are gradual and slow, people think it's not as bad, but what it's like is like having a million microsurgeries every single day for years. Because the end result is you have, a 19, 20-year-old man. If they were on puberty blockers for the entire duration of their natal puberty, right, they're going to have the penis the size of an 11-year-old. So there's no surgery that can ever do that. So it changes you from the inside out, right? Where the other surgeries are just on the outside. So they're all
Wow.
crazy, they're all radical. But this is something that is it's sinister. And especially the fact that they said they were stopping it, but they had just continued it behind closed doors. Yeah, it's horrifying.
So, okay, that's so basically, it's not like they can do this little incision, put this little thing in there, and in say 5 years they take it out, and life goes back to normal. I mean, what's happening, as I understand it, is that it's like, this is my very basic understanding, but puberty in a lot of ways is the process that turns our bodies from a child, adult, female or male into an adult, female or male. Right. So for a woman, or a girl, she starts developing breasts, her period starts, hair develops, all those things. And for men, likewise, they develop, down below, and they, their voice changes, and they develop, maybe hair in their chest, and, all the things that, I went through as a going through this. And so it basically stops that. And so I'd imagine, like what you said, that let's just say that some 12-year-old boy goes in there and he gets this because he thinks he's a girl. And they say, well, if you take this puberty blocker, have this surgery, then it'll be a lot easier to be a woman, because his voice is going to stay probably in a more higher register. He's not going to have this big bulge growing in his pants that happens for men when they kind of the coming of age, and all the other things that would probably maybe even bone structure, all these things that would change. And so if, like you said, let's just say that 18 years old, he finally comes to a point where he's like, oh my gosh, like, this is ruining me. You can't just take it out and then all of a sudden everything's back to normal. I mean, this is a person that is now, I'd say, damaged, like is medically damaged. He will never be a normal, healthy male in the way we look at men in terms of reproductive organs and all that. Like, it's a permanent change. Is that a correct understanding?
Yeah, and really it's more horrifying than that, but that's exactly correct because once they're started, according to their own protocols, there's no exit route. There's no alternative. They are blackmailed with the threat of their own suicide. So if they express hesitation, if the parents express, maybe we should try something else, the first thing these doctors do is threaten them with their own suicide. And that's also what I found the hospital was doing because, they had the directors of the program that supposedly didn't exist were given were given the opportunity to speak at the hospital's most prestigious lecture series, right? Which shows that this was a institutional priority. And they were talking about how parents would express concern. The first thing they would do is say, well, your kid's going to kill themselves if you don't do this. So by their own protocol, it's not reversible. And reversible is kind of a myth, it's a euphemism because nothing is reversible if you do it medically, right? Like if you do something to someone, you can never take that back. But what they're trying to say is, are the effects minimal, right? Like if you put a puberty blocker into some kid, right, rather you do the injection, which only lasts 3 months, the blockers last 12 months, right? The implant lasts 12 months. So if you do an injection for a kid, who's 11 years old and that's it, they don't, pursue it any time after that, you would say that the effects are minimal because they're just going to go on to have puberty. But in the case of these transgender clinics, they're threatening these kids with their suicide. The protocol says there is no other option. You have to block the entirety of puberty, go on to hormones, and then surgery. And the statistics back this up because 95 to 98% of kids who are started on blockers go on to cross-sex hormones. By that point, they are permanently sterilized because when you start blockers before the onset of puberty, your sperm or your eggs in women or in girls never get the chance to go through the process to become viable sperm or eggs.
So a lot of folks are not a big fan of all fruits and veggies. Some taste great, but many don't. And you have to admit, when you're in the produce section, all those vibrant colors of fruits and veggies look so good. Balance at Nature explains that all those colors you see in the produce section equals nutritional variety. different colors signify different key nutrients. So if you only eat your favorite one or two veggies, you're missing a whole world of vital nutrients. And that's why you should eat a big variety of fruits and veggies. Well, I decided it was time I start taking Balance of Nature's fruit and veggie supplements each day. And get this, some Balance of Nature customers say the fruit and veggie capsules taste so good, you can actually chew them. So I gave Balance of Nature a try, and I'm glad I did. Are you ready? So whether you order online or call them direct, you must use a promo code Seth to get this special offer of 35% off and free shipping on your first order. As a preferred customer, call them at 800-246-8751 and use discount code Seth, or order online at balanceofnature.com. Use discount code Seth to get 35% off and free shipping on your first order as a preferred customer. It's insane. And I want to get into more of your story, but just reflecting on this, the fact that we're having this conversation. I mean, let's say, if you look back at ancient cultures and say you find this civilization that ended up collapsing, you look for signs, there's indicators of what the society was like, and you can usually correlate the way a society was with its collapse, whether it was rampant corruption, whatever it was. You look back, I can imagine the future people looking back on this society and saying, gosh, that society got to a place where they were literally like mutilating children. Like the government was sponsoring the mutilation of children and killing the fertility of the race. Like the damage being done by this is so horrific. And, and with a lot of things, they happen very gradual. So like for a lot of people, they now were used to it. You say, oh, there's transgender stuff and you're kind of used to it. But even if you went back to like the 1950s and you asked someone in the 1950s, do you think America could ever get to a place where they'd be literally chopping the breasts off of children and chopping, up these kids and doing this? They'd say that would never happen. There's no way it could ever happen. But here we are, and it's here. And so your story, so you are doing your residency at this children's hospital, and you see these announcements. You see Ken Paxton coming forward saying, okay, this is now potentially, we're going to be looking at this as potential criminal investigation for child abuse. And now you have done these surgeries, but like most surgeries that get done and are being used maliciously now, there's oftentimes the original way it was being done was helpful for people, right? It's kind of like amputation, right? That you can successfully amputate someone's leg to save them from an infection or whatever it is. But if you do that with no cause of infection, it's a pretty malicious operation to do to somebody, right?
Or like mastectomies,
They're even better, even better. So you saw this happening, and what do you think? You thought, I got to do something about this. Like, what was that process you went through?
Well, I didn't believe it. I didn't. So I thought this must be like holdovers from before the announcement. Like maybe they just had them scheduled and then they're doing it. It's like, okay, fine, whatever. But then over the next couple of months, it becomes more and more frequent. The stories become more and more horrifying. They're getting younger and younger. And then I'm thinking to myself, like, this can't just be a one-off situation. So then I started looking into it more, right? And then I look at the Texas Children's Hospital website, and I do that because every clinic has to have a website where parents can go schedule appointments, find out who the doctors are. And there was no indication that Texas Children's Hospital had an active transgender clinic. So I was thinking to myself, like, can this really be that the biggest children's hospital in the world had told the public one thing, but behind closed doors, they're just like completely lying? It just seems so insane. But then all doubt, was removed in January of 2023. So it was 7 months after that statement, right? 9 months. It was March of 2022. It was in January 2023 that all doubt was gone, because that's when the directors of the program were given the opportunity to speak at the hospital's most prestigious lecture series. So it's like you have the directors who are teaching the general pediatricians how to ask about gender identity behind the backs of their parents, how they're involving psychiatry, endocrinology, social work, case management, all these different, portions of the hospital into this program. But then there was even a social worker who we had on a Zoom conference with like 150 medical students in January of 2023 talk about how she would, instead of documenting consults to go to the transgender clinic, she would call them. And she said she called them in order to avoid scrutiny from the governing medical bodies in Texas. So she was talking about how she was concealing it from the public, which is like the worst thing you could possibly do in the medical profession, which is to not document things. I mean, that's like our entire job, right? To justify what you do. So at that point, I knew I had to do something about it, right? Because they are lying about a program that is manipulating, mutilating, and sterilizing these children. And what they're doing is abusing them. I have a responsibility as a surgeon to do something about that because my responsibility doesn't just apply to my own patients, right? The people who I do surgery on or the people who I see in clinic, but also to the people in my profession. So I have a moral responsibility to do something. So that's when I began reaching out to journalists in January of 2023, but it took me months to actually get a hold of someone who was willing to take the story.
And so what happened next? Who took your story, and then what was the process after that?
Yeah, so I got in touch. So I just sent cold emails to like hundreds of them to all these different news organizations, and they all either didn't believe me because the story was too insane to believe, or they just thought I was a nobody. So it's like, why listen to this guy? But Christopher Rufo demonstrated some interest. This was in mid-May of 2023. So we go through the process of making sure that I was legit, right? That I worked there, that the information was correct, and that they were actually really lying to the public. So we go through the whole process of vetting. And then he releases a story on May 16th, 2023, with me as the anonymous whistleblower. And the story demonstrates that the hospital is lying to the public about their transgender clinic. They said they shut it down when they did the exact opposite. But the amazing thing was, it came at the perfect time because I didn't know this at the time, but the Texas Senate was voting on a bill called SB 14, which was the law that was going to ban these interventions in children. And the vote was scheduled on May 17th, a day later. So our story comes out a day before. So the effect of it is exactly what we were hoping, where within 24 hours of our story coming out, the conduct we had exposed was voted to become illegal in a bill that was passed with bipartisan support. And it was because our story came out that multiple Democrats voted in favor of the law because they didn't think this kind of thing was happening in their districts.
Incredible. And so you went to Christopher. He wrote this article. This comes out. It obviously reaches a lot of lawmakers at the right time, and they see, okay, hey, let's make this into law. So that website I just pulled up there, I believe this is it, right? This is September 2023. That SB 14, right? The SB 14 passed, which forbids gender transition hormone and surgical interventions for minors, which the puberty blockers, which I would assume that falls under this. So did the hospital, when this law went into effect, were they still continuing secretly, or was this enough this law going into effect, did that stop them completely?
Yeah, so the law went into effect in September of 2023. It was passed May 17th. So it takes a couple of months because it got challenged by the ACLU and a bunch of other organizations. But it was about a week and a half later that the CEO of the hospital had said that they were going to shut down the program, for the second time, right, in just over a year, in accordance with SB 14. So according to them, they, and we got to take them for their word that they are no longer doing this after the passage of the law. But I would also contend that this has always been illegal, right? No matter the passage of SB 14 or anything else, right? This, in my estimation, right, is child abuse, right? What they're doing is taking kids with psychological issues and using physiological solutions to convince them of something that is not true, right? And then blackmailing them with the risk of their own suicide about it. So, but that is correct. So, it was about a week and a half later that the CEO said, that they're not going to do it anymore. But what they're going to do is send all these kids to other states to have it done.
I see. So it seems like from the story you told me so far, this is a big win. And it's almost, a little bit of, maybe happily ever after, right? Okay, that the whistleblower came forward, the article was published just in time, the law was passed, and it's done. But that's
Yeah,
not
and
how
also
this.
if I can mention, I mean, there was another whistleblower who came out, right? Another person who worked in the clinic with these doctors who expressed how horrified they were to see how like kids were being put on blockers and hormones after like 15 minutes. Like they would ask a girl, it's like, do you not want to go through your periods? And if the girl was like, no, I don't want to go through it, well, here's a bunch of testosterone, right? And then the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, also announces an investigation into the hospital. So it's like, I mean, it was the biggest win you could possibly imagine. And I'm anonymous at the time. No one knows who I am. So yeah, I just went back into my normal life, right?
Until what?
Yeah, until about a month and a half later, right? So this was my 5th year of surgical training, the year I was graduating. Finishing my training, I had a job lined up, getting ready to move on with the rest of my life. So the next part of the story starts on June 23rd, 2023. And the story, just for reference, was May 16th, 2023. And it was the day of my graduation from surgical training, right? One of the most important days of my life where, you sacrifice so much the previous 5 years, you miss all these important life events. But now it's like you're a surgeon, right? Like you have all this responsibility. It's a meaningful day. My family's in town. And I'm getting ready for the ceremony in the evening. It's me and my wife. We're at my apartment around 11, 12 in the early afternoon. All of a sudden, I get an aggressive knock on the door. And I'm like, man, it was weird, right? Didn't really, didn't expect that. But I shuffle over, open the door. Standing outside are 2 federal agents. They tell me they're with Health and Human Services. They show me their badges and tell me that they're investigating a case regarding medical records. And in that moment, you just kind of freak out. You just don't know what to do. But in the back of my mind, I knew exactly why they were there. Because a month before, we had challenged the dominant political ideology. And if I can do that, if we can do that and have this law passed within 24 hours, have other whistleblowers come out, then how many other people might do the same thing? So we knew that they were there to make an example out of me, right? But you don't really know what to do, so I invite them in. We sit down and exchange some small talk, and they start setting up a tripod to do an interview with me. And I'm like, oh man, it's probably a bad idea. But it was perfect timing that my wife comes out, and she's a brilliant attorney. And she had actually just been hired at the Department of Justice as an assistant U.S. attorney in the Northern District of Texas. She was undergoing a federal background check at the time. They didn't know this, but just for context. So we both look at each other, my wife and I, and we go back to our bedroom and just have a conversation. And we both knew that we shouldn't talk to them without an attorney present. So go back out and I tell them that, and they say, okay, no problem. They leave, the door closes. But before they left, they had given me something called a target letter. So after the door closes, we read this letter, and it had informed me that I was a potential target of a criminal investigation. And it was signed by an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of Texas, informing me that I was a potential target. So we knew that we had a decision to make. Do we try to comply with was obviously this phony, corrupt investigation? Like they were trying to make an example out of me, or do we try to fight back? I knew that they were there to instill fear, to intimidate. But as they were coming to find out, they knocked on the wrong door, because that day we decided to fight. We knew that if we didn't do anything in that moment to fight back, that what kind of future are we delivering to our children? If you stand up, all you do is tell the truth and fulfill the responsibilities of your profession, you're going to have the most powerful federal leviathan come after you. So we knew this was corrupt. We knew we had to fight against it. And it was really in the months after that we found out how deep the corruption went.
So talk about some of that corruption and talk about what was behind this, because to me, what it looks like is it's not that you were, say, a Boeing whistleblower, and you breached NDA, and you breached contracts to release very private information. This is, I think this is very different than that. And so them coming after you, really this, we're getting into the DOJ and these agencies coming after you. Is it just because you went against this ideology that the current regime has adopted? Is that really what it is? Is you're someone who spoke out and they're making an example of you?
Yeah, and I think that is exactly it. And so what we did is, after these agents came, I got on the phone with Christopher Rufo, right? And I tell him what happened. He says he's going to clear his schedule, put me in touch with a lawyer. And this was the perfect person who I could have gotten in touch with. She was a lawyer who had just left a position at a big law firm. She left because she didn't want to put pronouns in her bio, gave up a 7-figure salary to start her own law firm. And she's like this Shiite Catholic, rosary in one hand, middle finger in the other, like bulldog of an attorney. So I get on the phone with her and we realize that she's the perfect person for this job. So we choose her to represent us. And it was in the next couple of months, the interactions that my attorneys had with the Department of Justice that had really horrified us and had showed us how deep the corruption went. And it took me really, 6 months of these experiences to make the decision to take this story public. And it was because of how bad it was getting. And after I took this story public, my attorneys, felt obligated themselves to blow the whistle, to document how corrupt what this prosecutor was doing. So what they had to do was write a letter to Congress, right? The people who are supposed to represent us, who are supposed to hold these bureaucrats and these prosecutors accountable. And what that letter documents is that this prosecutor had no understanding of the facts of the case. She had admitted this to my attorneys, right? She said that she would bring me to a jury trial, even if she was sure that she was going to lose, right? Which is completely outside the scope of what a federal prosecutor is supposed to do. You can't just bring people to trial without a probable cause, without having a reason for it, right? She had accused me of felonies, right? All I have to do is apologize and I can avoid felony prosecution. But felony prosecution for what? They never specified. They said I violated HIPAA, but they never, expressed how I violated HIPAA. They said, I violated access, but they never specified how that was possible. And worst of all, right, without knowing any of the facts of the case, right, they didn't know anything about the case, the details, anything, right? They did enough research to find out that my wife was undergoing a background check. And she brought that up. She says, well, Andrea, my wife, is not going to have any problems unless she continues to become difficult. What she was referring to was my wife advising me of my constitutional right. So you have this person who has no case, right? Who's using her authority to go after someone who specifically told the truth. And another thing she said was that, I had no right to blow the whistle. She said it wasn't my job, that if I really wanted to do something, I should have gone on the street and held a sign, right? She's telling me how to do my job when she has no idea how to do hers, right? She has, and it became so clear that, the abuse of authority, right? That she's using her position to go after political enemies. Like she should reconsider what the components of her job is before she tells me how to do mine. And I thought to myself, it's like, the only legitimacy this investigation has is the legitimacy I grant it, right? It's only if I comply with it, right? If I just tell people how corrupt this is, then it becomes self-evident, right? The only legitimacy is that which I grant them. So I made a decision. I was like, I'm going to be destroyed if I stay silent, if I stay anonymous, if I try to fight this in the shadows, because that's how a corrupt Department of Justice works. Like if you stay in the shadows, if you don't tell the truth, right, you're going to get destroyed. So I thought to myself, like, I'm just going to tell this story, but I'm not going to only just tell this story. We're going to hold these people accountable, because if they're going to go after me, they're going to go after a bunch of other people, right? The only way for me to preserve my profession is to fight back. The only way for me to preserve this country, to preserve a future for my children, is to fight back. So that's exactly what we decided to do. In the process, we've sacrificed a lot. We spent over $200,000, everything we've ever saved. I don't say that as a victim. Being able to spend that money to fight back has been the greatest privilege I've ever been able, been the greatest privilege of my life, and that's exactly what we're doing. So,
And so obviously with legal stuff, there's probably limitations as to what you can talk about, but where is this process? I mean, so it's kind of like they think that you're just this little guy, that they're the bully. They can come up and punch you a few times and you'll give them your lunch money. But instead what you're doing is you're saying, no, you can't have my lunch money. And you bring in your bully to come, fight with them, and they didn't expect that. So
yeah.
Who are you going after, like in your defense, or with your fighting back? What are you fighting back against, and what are you doing, and what do you hope to achieve?
Yeah, and I would say this is one of those cases that's unique because I kind of blew caution to the wind, right? It's like this is one of those legal cases where I'm willing to talk about every single aspect of it, right? Because all of my attorneys said, this is a bad idea. You should not go public, right? But well, of course, no, I have to. I mean, this is this is not the same country that we grew up in, right? This is not a legitimate justice system where they're actually seeking the truth, right? This is something that we have to take our fight to the public in order for our elected representatives to do something about it. So, but to answer your question specifically, who are we going after? The letter my attorneys had sent to Congress was sent to Jim Jordan, the select subcommittee on the weaponization of the Department of Justice in the House. So what we are intending on doing is hopefully pursuing a congressional investigation into the prosecutor, number one, the FBI, number two, because we know that the FBI had been involved with, for some reason, interviewing a bunch of residents at my old program, right? Like for what reason, we have no idea. There were a couple other instances of the FBI, using these very aggressive tactics towards people. I cannot disclose who those people were, but other portions of the story, right? And what's their involvement, but also Health and Human Services. How is it that Health and Human Services, had mobilized all these resources, a typically sclerotic, slow-moving organization, but they have mobilized all these resources in 4 weeks to find out who I am, where I live, what day my graduation is, what time I graduate, find out the best time to come to my apartment the day of my graduation, but also to find out it was me who was the anonymous whistleblower. So, what authority are they abusing that should be taken away from them? So that's one aspect of it, but we're also going after, individuals within the state of Texas, attorneys who challenge laws like SB 14, who explicitly lie in their lawsuits challenging it, right? Misrepresenting facts about the medical science, right? Because these are violations of the ethics of lawyers. And if we don't hold them accountable, then how are we ever going to be expect to win in this fight when the primary tactic is lawfare against their opponents?
That makes sense. Okay. So I've got a question for you, which is maybe a little bit more going to be extrapolating and trying to understand something, and maybe it's even more philosophical. The mechanism, this massive apparatus between now FBI, HHS, obviously on a more local level, the attorneys, the assistant DA, and I think Southern District of where your area. It's obvious that there is this behemoth of an operation that is trying to push forward and protect the ability to mutilate children and to ruin these children's lives. And that's not even getting into the apparatus of promoting this stuff and promoting Pride Month and all the the rights of this, and all the books getting into schools. I mean, it's a massive thing that to me is hard to make sense of. And you can't see the forest through the trees, and so when we're in the woods, it's like what I mentioned earlier. We don't see what it is. You go back to the 1950s, you can see it for what it is. You see how insane it actually is. In your opinion, and based upon your experience with these interacting with this, what do you think is the driving factor why do you think we're at a place where there's even this much energy and money and effort going into performing these operations on children? And maybe it's a spiritual answer, maybe it's a criminal answer. But when you're laying in bed at night thinking like, what am I actually up against here? What do you come to?
It's funny you ask that. It's such a good question because I've spent so much time thinking about that, like in inordinate amount of time, because that's really the crux of what it is. Like it seems so crazy that we're even having this conversation, right? Like growing up, did you ever think you would talk to someone about, right? Like if they told the truth, they're being targeted by the federal government, right? It's crazy, but I think it has to do with the conflict between the shame of those who lie and the conflict with those who tell the truth. Because when people lie, they adopt a certain amount of shame. And when they're surrounded by other people who lie, who've also adopted that shame, then there's no conflict there. Because when they look at the other people who are lying, then they see the same shame that is within themselves, right? Because everyone's lying. But when you have someone who enters that little milieu of shame and deceit, who tells the truth, that person introduces like these tiny little photons of light, which exposes the shame for what it is. And that explains why these people make such a great effort to destroy those people who tell the truth. Because once you have the truth, and you have the extent of the shame be revealed to the people who are doing everything possible to avoid it. So, what we kind of commonly refer to as cancel culture is just that, but it's not something that's unique to our time. Like these people have to shut down anyone who tells the truth, because if the light becomes bright enough, what happens is they have to come to terms with the reality that although they said they were the ones who were trying to protect these kids, who were trying to save their lives, who were trying to affirm them, when enough light comes to bear, what's going to happen is they're going to have to come to the conclusion that was actually they themselves who were destroying these kids, that it was themselves who were feeding these kids to the wolves, who were lying to them. And when all these kids go so far down this road, right, they look in the mirror and they say, what happened to me, right? Like, why can I not have kids? And they say, why should I go on living? And they say, where were the people who love me? Who were the ones who were supposed to protect me? And they make the conclusion that they were the ones who had fed me to the wolves. Like, why is the risk of suicide so high? Well, at that point, the question becomes redundant. So I think that's what's driving it. You have so many people who had adopted this line that this is a good thing, that they cannot possibly come to the conclusion that what they were doing the whole time was actually destroying the people they were claiming to care about the most.
It's almost as if I believe that all of us have souls. And I believe that the soul is very closely tied to what we think of as our conscience. It's this some part of us that actually knows right from wrong. Now, I think that the conscience can be covered up. It can be trained the wrong ideas from a very young age, right? Which is why communism tries to get a hold of people at a very young age. But I think that fundamentally, though, it's always there, even if it's buried. And so what I take away from this and from your answer, I think it's an answer that reflects a lot of deep thought into the why, as to what I asked you, is because what you represent to some of these people, whether it's the people within the hospital doing it, whether it's the DA protecting it, whether it's the FBI agents covering it up, what you represent is their conscience that they have fought so hard to bury. And so when you bring this up, maybe there's a moral dilemma inside of them, or maybe they're so far gone it doesn't exist anymore, but they know that there's some part of them that they're fighting against, because if you expose that, all of them, I think the people that are complicit in this, eventually they'll have to face that reality. And whether it's right now or on their deathbed, or in their after they die, right? Whatever our actions now will echo through eternity. And so whatever it is they're doing, it's like you represent that. And so it makes sense. Like to me, it's great because in a lot of ways, I think it's a very spiritual answer. It makes sense why there's some part of them that actually probably hates someone like you, and why that the assistant DA wants to destroy you and wants to destroy your wife, because there's something inside of her that she also hates just as much.
Yeah. And it's like, and because what they know too is just like, when we see someone get canceled, right? They want to make sure that that person, they kind of degrade themselves and adopt the lie, right? They repeat some false, utterance, right? It's like a hymn to like this new religion, right? That they submit themselves, they kneel to it. So they degrade themselves and they kind of reinsert themselves into like this group that has accepted themselves based on a lie.
Folks, perhaps you'd agree with me when I say that over the past 5 years, the mainstream healthcare system's credibility has plummeted. Alternative healthcare systems that aren't beholden to medical consensus or big pharma are on the rise. Sweetamine is time tested and proven to boost your life with better health. It's one of the leading products that helps with inflammation and daily aches and pains. Just because you get older, it doesn't mean that you have to feel old. And folks, did you know that most of the diseases that make people sick and die these days are rooted in chronic inflammation, oftentimes due to glycine deficiency? So, sweetamine is composed mainly of the amino acid glycine, the nutrient that the immune system uses to regulate inflammation. So, with once daily sweetamine, most people feel the reduction in pain after just a few days. So, I challenge you to the 12-day sweetamine challenge to fight inflammation and take control of your health today. So, folks, buy sweetamine online at sweetamine.com or call 855-GET-SWEET. That's 855-438-7933. And make sure you use promo code SETH, SETH, to get a nice discount on your purchase.
So it kind of self-perpetuates, but then they also know that when someone feels this shame, right, there's one of two decisions, right? You can either continue to lie or you can see the person telling the truth as something to live up to, right? Like, I feel this shame, but you know what? I can change my behavior and live up to it. And they know that once there is outlight or someone who's telling the truth, that if more people believe that they can live up to that standard, that all I have to do is speak the truth, then that becomes like this snowball effect. Then more and more people will start doing it, which is why they so aggressively try to destroy people like me. But it's so amazing to see the response, because after I came out with my story, all these people who've reached out to me, right, like different whistleblowers who are working with now, right, they saw my original story came out, and they were like, well, I felt this shame, but I felt like I had to do something about it, right? I had to rid myself of that shame in order to save my own soul, because for all of us, it's like we couldn't live with ourselves if we didn't do something about it. So it's like the only way to redeem yourself when you're faced with this existential crisis of like your own moral dignity. What do you do? But you have to act. And I think more people are starting to do that now because they realize what's at stake.
You mentioned that people of the lie, basically the people who bought into it and are defending it. Remind me of this book that's literally called "People of the Lie." It
Oh,
says,
that's so
it
fun.
says,
That's crazy. Yeah.
yeah, it says, just a little quotation here. It says, "People who are evil attack others instead of facing their own failures." Right? Like that's it. Like that summarizes our explanation right there. It says, "People who are evil attack others instead
And
of
look at that,
facing."
2,200 reviews. I mean, that's huge for a book on Amazon. I had never heard of this book before. It's kind of funny that I don't think I've ever used that phrase before.
Yeah. It's interesting. So, Eitan, before we sign off, and I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to help your story get to more people. I do want to pull up two other pages. One is just your Twitter. I'll put this in the link below. It's just at Eithan Haim, which people can find that in the description to the show. So I encourage folks to follow what you're doing there. Also, you have a Give, Send, Go. Obviously, there's a massive legal battle, which means a massive financial battle. And the people that we're up against have almost unlimited funds. So it's givesendgo.com/Texas_whistleblower. If anybody wants to support what you're doing, whether it be with prayer, with share, or with giving, right? Which is obviously those are the tenets of Give, Send, Go. I encourage that. And so, Eitan, do you have any words in closing? Any last thoughts you want to share before we sign off?
Yeah, I just want to thank you so much for having me on. It's really a privilege to be a part of it and talk to you. And just I would really encourage people, like, now is the time to fight. And if you want to support our effort, they can donate to the Give Send Go. And it's just important for people to know too that all that money goes straight into the legal battle. Like my wife and I, like we have accepted we're going to be broke for a long time. That's not going to change for years and years to come, and that's okay. That's the fight we've taken. But so the money is going towards our offensive actions now. Yeah, if you want to be a part of it, that's the place to go. But yeah, and also the one last thing I would say is, there's a lot of people I'm sure who are listening, maybe who are in a situation where they feel like, they could blow the whistle on something or they could do something, but they think they don't want to take the risk because their life might be destroyed, right? They might lose their job or whatever, or they won't be able to pay their mortgage, and they think they would step into this world that is like dark and dangerous and there's no hope in it. But I can tell you that in my experience, that's what I thought. But once I stepped onto the other side, you realize that the grass is so much greener, right? It's like you can't even believe that you would ever had considered not doing it before, because it's like for the first time, I'm just able to live with basic dignity. I'm just able to tell the truth, and I'm sure there's one or two people who are listening who are in the same position. And no matter what financial sacrifice there is, right? It's like you want your kids to be able to grow up one day and be like, yeah, my dad or my mom had done something that actually had an impact. And those stories are going to be carried on, for generations, just like my grandparents did. So, that's the last thing I would say.
Wise words to conclude with. So thank you again. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. I hope the best for you. I hope you get some support after this interview that's coming in, and we'll have to do some sort of update, maybe a couple of months once things have progressed, and just checking on how you're doing.
I'll tell you what, there's going to be, there's something coming soon. That's, will be pretty good.
Good. We'll have to do a show on it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, take care and God bless, man. As we've talked about a lot, I believe that one of the greatest threats to our freedom comes in the form of digital currency, specifically central bank digital currency, which I believe would take away our freedoms in ways that we've never even imagined before, be that significant. Now, this past week, the House passed a bill that actually bans the Federal Reserve from issuing a central bank digital currency to the American citizens. Now, this seems like a fantastic thing, because it is. It's still forward progress, but there's a lot of things in there that are catching that aren't necessarily what they seem. So today with my guest, Dr. Kirk Elliott, we're going to be looking into the specifics of that bill and seeing what it really means and how it's only applying to a specific area of how this would affect us, and that we're still open to a very wide range of threats, especially on the global level. But we're also going to be talking about some recent resignations of some very significant people in the banking industry, including Klaus Schwab himself, stepping down as the I think chairman of the World Economic Forum. We've got Jamie Dimon from Chase announcing he's stepping down, the head of the FDIC. There's some pretty significant, kind of oddly timed resignations and announcements of resignations from major players in the financial industry. And finally, we're going to be discussing what's the bigger picture of what's happening with the BRICS nations and the de-dollarization, as we've talked about extensively on this show. So we had, I think in the past couple of days, a major person from the banking industry in Russia. I think he runs the second largest bank in Russia, if I'm not mistaken, made a few statements, but pretty significant statements about where the American economy is headed. And it's hard to ignore his words. And he's speaking, I feel, very honestly about where we're heading if we continue creating this much debt. We're rapidly going into debt and a pace that's probably never been seen before on this earth. I mean, it's absolutely insane. But he also shows how vulnerable the American system is, not just our financial system, but the government, the way of life in America as we see it, how vulnerable we are. Because as he points out, if some of these BRICS nations start dumping some of their U.S. Treasury bonds, that right there could, in conjunction with the money printing, could spell the end of America as we know it. So there's some pretty serious topics we're going to be discussing here. So please enjoy the show. Kirk, it's great to have you on as usual. Thank you for being here today.
Oh, it's so great to be with you. Hope you had an amazing Memorial Day weekend.
We did. Yeah, it was wonderful. I mean, family, flags, freedom. That's all you can ask for. So it was great. Thank you.
Yeah. Somber thing to remember those who gave their lives, for us to have freedom, but it's a celebration. It's a celebration of their lives and that we do have freedom. I mean, it's kind of a little bit of give and take there.
Yeah, it's also a reminder of the cost of freedom. And I think
Hmm.
that in a lot of ways we've forgotten what the cost of freedom is, but we're learning it now as our freedom is on the knife's edge, unfortunately. But as you and I have talked about a lot, one of the biggest ways that your freedoms are taken away is through the financial system. And we've spent a lot of time discussing central bank digital currencies, and not just CBDCs, but also unified ledger, the much bigger picture of what this means to have our
Hmm.
stuff digitally controlled. And so, one thing that happened recently, and actually, I'll pull up the press release here, is the House passed. This is earlier, about a little over a week ago. A Actually, no, only a couple of days ago. So here we go. House passes CBDC Anti-Surveillance State Act. It says today the U.S. House of Representatives passed H.R. 5403, the CBDC Anti-Surveillance State Act, sponsored by Majority Whip Tom Emmer. It says it halts unelected bureaucrats from issuing a central bank digital currency which would threaten Americans' right to financial privacy without explicit authorization from Congress. Which that seems like a little bit of a, yeah. I'm not sure how comfortable I am with that, but I want to see what you think of this, because this looks like a major win. It's like, okay, great. The giant threat on the horizon now is being subdued, but is there more to it than what there seems?
You know, there always is. I mean, there just always is. But when you look at it, it's like, sweet, this is a win. They're gonna say central bank digital currency is outlawed. And just like what Norway did over the weekend, right? Norway actually said you can use cash in Norway. It doesn't all have to be digital. We basically prohibit retailers and merchants in Norway from rejecting customers because they want to pay cash, right? So it's like, okay, that one actually is more of a win than what this one is, even though the House said, no, we're not going to have CBDCs issued by the Fed. Okay, so there's some language in the bill that I kind of want to look at. So there's a subsection and there's an A, B, and a C part of it. If you scroll down there, it's pretty close to the top, but a little bit further, it's coming up. Okay, here. So Section 16 of the Federal Reserve Act is amended. So they want to amend the Federal Reserve Act from 1913. We're adding a new paragraph. A Federal Reserve Bank shall not offer products or services directly to an individual, maintain an account on behalf of an individual, or issue a central bank digital currency or any digital asset that is substantially similar under any other name or label directly to an individual. So people are looking at it, it's like, sweet, the Federal Reserve can't issue a central bank digital currency or offer products to clients, which is what like the Fed Now app would be. But here's where, when words have meaning, especially when it's in a bill, right? So did they talk about non-governmental organizations or other entities issuing digital currency or central bank type digital currency? No, they said the Fed, right? So here's where, to me, they're missing the entire point. And I think politicians are smarter than this, and they know that, to me, this is window dressing. It's political theater, trying to get people to say, oh, Congressman, Congresswoman, you're amazing. You rejected central bank digital currency when 98% of the world wants it, and all these countries are behind it, right? But what does it not prohibit? It doesn't prohibit a global central bank digital currency issued by For example, the Bank for International Settlements, or the World Bank, or the International Monetary Fund, or some kind of a special drawing right from the United Nations or something like that, right? So to me, central bank digital currency is going to be a global thing, because if you look at Agenda 2030 and the tenets of it, they want a one world government, they want a universal currency for everybody, they want population control. I mean, they want all kinds of stuff, but really they want one political system for the whole world. They want one currency for the whole world, right? So when you look at that, everything that we've looked at that you referenced in the first part of the show, the unified ledger, what a digital currency actually is, it's programmable money that can cut you off from buying or selling if your ideology doesn't match up with the globalist agenda. But the unified ledger is a creepy thing, because everything that you own gets tokenized, and you can change ownership of everything that you own with the flip of a switch. Now, why would they limit themselves to just a country being able to do that? And the answer is they wouldn't. Right? This is a global thing. So what the bill does say is that you can't have the Fed issuing a central bank digital currency, but it says nothing about a global non-governmental institution. And here's the thing, Seth, Biden already allowed for that to happen. When he basically went into the World Health Organization's 192 countries that say the president of the World Health Organization, under a state of a global health crisis, can stop your travel, can restrict your purchases, can restrict you from even opening a bank account, that can do all kinds of things. So our sovereignty was given up already by our president to this non-governmental organization. And what do? They're going to be able to actually issue a central bank digital currency if they want to, because they can control it with the stroke of a pen, or with the power of their voice. They can say, you know what? It's a national emergency, a national health emergency. We have to get the global economy in lockstep with what this agenda is to save it from disease X or something like that. So therefore, we're mandating that everybody goes into a global currency issued by the IMF, let's say. I mean, we already gave up our sovereignty. So who cares what the House actually said in this? To me, it's has no teeth. Because, okay, so let's just say that it did have teeth. Well, it still has to pass the Senate. And I don't think the Senate would actually go along with the House. It's too close there. There's only a couple votes difference. And then let's say that the Senate did pass it. Well, then the president has to ratify it or veto it, right? So either way, I don't think that we get it in its current form, because either the Senate rejects it or the president does. But let's take it one step further. Let's say the Senate does accept this bill and they vote the same, and then the president accepts it. Well, why would they do that? Well, because they know that CBDCs doesn't matter at the federal level. It matters at the global level to actually have everybody be a global citizen. So to me, this bill that a lot of people on the right are very excited about, eliminating central bank digital currency, to me is truly political theater in an election year. I truly don't think it matters. And I'm not trying to be a negative Nelly. I'm just saying that words have meanings in bills. And to me, this bill actually has no meaning to it, because they didn't broadly define enough who could issue central bank digital currency and who can't. They limited it to the Fed, not everything else that are global entities.
So one question that I have, and I think you're a good person to answer this, because you deal with a lot of people that are trying to escape the economic system or systems that could end up enslaving them, right? So they're getting out of the path of that train. So looking at this, and I agree with you, especially from hearing your perspective, that I'll pull it back up again, because you can see, like, specifically, right, the Federal Reserve Bank shall not It didn't say that no governing or no banking organization, federal or international, may do X. It was just the Federal Reserve Bank. I mean, they could probably create some sort of shell company and call it the Federal Digital Reserve, and it probably wouldn't would no longer be stopped by this, right? But
Right.
the question I have, though, is it seems like, say, a year and a half ago, when you and I are discussing CBDC, that a lot of your average folks here in America, if you said, one of the greatest threats is CBDC, they'd say, "Oh yeah, is that like the marijuana cream, like the CBD cream?" They didn't understand it. So, do you think that the fact that a bill that actually I'll go back to pull open the web page, so something that literally states, as we talked, as I read in the other page, actually I'll pull up the other one right here, right, where they say that the CBDC would threaten Americans' right to financial privacy, and this is on the Financial Services Committee.house.gov website. Do you think that there's been a much larger public awareness of central bank digital currency? Because ultimately, I don't really trust anything that Congress does, or really anything a president or anything that Trump says he's going to do. It's like, well, they're going to find ways around it. I think the only thing that really matters is if enough of we the people reject these systems, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing with this show, is to get enough people to see it for what it is and say, I'm not playing in that game. Because it's like any way we play their game, we lose. So the way to win is just don't play the game. So do you think that this is a reflection of more of the general American public becoming aware of CBDC? And are you seeing, through your own business and your own interaction with people, are you seeing that reflected on the client side, that there's a much more awake public when it comes to the threat of these central bank digital currencies?
Yes, but I think it's multifaceted. So to answer that specific question, yeah, people have an inherent, at least people who are freedom-loving people, have an inherent distrust and distaste for Big Brother, right? Which is what central bank digital currency is all about. It's not intended to fix a broken system. It's intended for people control. Look at the Bank for International Settlements, memorandums. The ability to cut off bank wires from bank to bank if the ideology of the use of funds doesn't match up. Look at the World Economic Forum, programmable money based on your digital social profile and social credit score. That's ideologically based spending. It's their words, not mine, right? So everybody has this inherent distrust of that. But, there's also an inherent distrust of banking in general. As banks are starting to really run out of money, be undercapitalized, and we just had news, 3 weeks ago, a month ago, of the big regional bank in Philadelphia that went into FDIC receivership, Silicon Valley Bank, and all those banks from last year. So this has got people on edge, right? And then here's where I start connecting some serious dots. Right. And things aren't quite as they seem. So you look at what happened last week alone, and who's resigning from their positions. Massive numbers of big bank leaders are resigning. Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase, the CEO, announced his resignation of Chase. The guy who serves as the executive director of JP Morgan Chase resigned. The president of the FDIC resigned. Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum resigned. The CEO of HSBC resigned. So why? I mean, a lot of these people are big, massive globalists, been working on central bank digital currency for decades, right? For this whole plan of Agenda 2030. And then more recently, starting in 2019, really this march toward central bank digital currency. And you know what? They're almost there with climate control and everything else, and surveillance and digitizing money and getting rid of paper currency, kicking the US dollar out of the global sandbox and and that power shift to the BRICS nations. Literally, their dream is almost fulfilled. So why would they step down? Right. So I'm thinking about this. It's like, okay, what would make me step down if we were about to get our dream of global domination, just right around the corner? Well, if they know that people aren't really going to accept it, and it's going to have massive revolt and upheaval and revolution style response, and anybody who's in power is going to get caught holding the bag, right? They're going to get blamed for it. So if they resign, they're not necessarily going to get blamed for it. They're gone. Whoever is in power is going to get blamed for it. This is why Trump said, a couple months ago, said, I hope that the economy collapses before I get in. Right. Well, it's like, so people misinterpret that. It's like Trump is evil. He's anti-American. He doesn't want the U.S. economy to thrive. It's like, yes, he does. That's why he's running. He needs to change things. What he was saying is it's going to collapse whether I'm in or not right away, because there's been so much damage done. He wants to be the guy that rebuilds it. But he says, if it happens after I get in, people are going to blame me, even though it's not my fault. Right. So maybe they want out. I don't know. I don't know. But two of the banks, this is an interesting side note. JP Morgan Chase and HSBC are the largest global shorters of silver on the planet. Massive amounts of naked shorts, like hundreds of millions of ounces in naked short positions. So then the Friday before Iran did the drone strikes on Israel, they recommended all their citizens they start buying silver rather than gold, because they knew and they recognized these short positions. And if they want to beat America without ever firing a bullet, you just create fear and you cause their banking system to go down. Well, that massive number of short positions, they get hurt in multiples, not dollar for dollar, multiples if the price of silver goes up. So it's like, Seth, look what's happened to silver in the last 2.5 months. Literally the last, 10 weeks. Silver's gone from 22.5 to 32. Right? It's up like almost 50% in 2.5 months. Those banks that have naked short positions are in crisis mode. And you look at some different stories globally, the president of the CEO of the second largest bank in Russia. There was this article on Zero Hedge that I was reading just earlier this morning. He warns that the U.S. is inevitably headed for a serious economic crisis. But what he said in there was one direct quote that is really interesting, and it goes along with this naked shorts that these banks have in silver. So for those keeping tabs, the U.S. debt surpassed $33 trillion for the first time. The U.S. added $1 trillion worth of debt in 3 months. So once we hit 33 trillion, 100 days later, we added another trillion. We're adding $1 trillion of new debt every 100 days, right? So now we're at like 34.5 trillion, right? So this is interesting. So you read what this guy said, and on that article, you scroll down a little bit further. $1 trillion every 100 days. But there's a direct quote after these pictures show up that is, I've got to read to you because it's right there. So I am thoroughly convinced that America is inevitably headed for a serious economic crisis. The amount of debt currently held by the U.S. today has reached inconceivable astronomical levels, and the dollar's monopoly on the global stage is the only thing enabling the Americans to maintain such a level of debt. If the Chinese or the Arabs took their money out of the U.S., a complete collapse would ensue for the financial sector and the government. It's like, oh my word, Seth, what did he just say? He just said that the BRICS nations if they start liquidating their US treasuries, putting them on the open market, destroying the US dollar, if they start not holding US treasuries and start liquidating them, the US economy is toast. It's on such precarious grounds that would destroy the financial system. It would destroy the US economy. And what is Russia doing? They got rid of all of their US treasuries. What is China doing? I mean, they're dumping US treasuries like there's nobody's business, right?
Yeah, here's China, this chart right here. You can see.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's just actually coming down a lot of their number of holdings. Because what did it start at? Its peak, 1,500, so $1.5 trillion. And now it's at like 800 billion. So, we're almost 50% down in their holdings. And so they continue to liquidate. Who's buying those US treasuries? The rest of the world isn't. It's the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is using money that they print out of thin air to be the buyer of last resort. And this is why we have the inflation. This is why we have this explosive debt. And this is why the CEO of the second largest bank in Russia was pretty well connected, I'm sure. It would be like Jamie Dimon here in America talking to Biden. I'm sure this guy talks to Putin a lot if he's got the second largest bank in Russia. They know what's coming, Seth. They know that the U.S. is on shaky ground. And because of our debt, this is biblical truth ringing out loudly. A borrower is a slave to the lender. You can't keep using other people's money. You ultimately have to pay the piper or it's over. This is why God warns us numerous times throughout his word, to don't get into debt. Live within your means, have wisdom, have discernment, and we haven't. And now even CEOs of foreign banks are seeing the writing's on the wall, it's over, and there's a power shift from the West to the East, and the BRICS nations, the BRICS plus nations. I hate to say it because I'm American. I want a strong dollar. I want a vibrant economy, but we're not playing this well, right? And we've lost that status as the reserve currency and everything else, and it's going to the East. And I don't think we can get it back at this point, right? Without a complete collapse of what we have. And then somebody like Trump coming in, changing it all together. What did he want to do? He wants to fight back. He said, hey, first thing when I get into office, I'm going to slap massive tariffs on Chinese goods. Right? Say, okay, so this is a delicate thing to do because you slap tariffs on Chinese goods. Sure, it hurts them economically, but it has to be done quickly and swiftly and big, because ultimately, if you put tariffs on Chinese goods and we're still importing a ton of stuff from China, it makes all of our stuff more expensive. And you're going to have the US population in complete crying out for help. It's like, what? Prices are even higher than they used to be. You slap tariffs on foreign oil. Yeah, great way to hurt them because we won't be buying foreign oil. But since we still import so much, it impacts us. And so these things have to be done quickly, and they have to be done in a very wise way. And this is why these things are very delicate, right? But this is why I think that CEO of that Russian bank says we are spinning for an economic disaster, because it's very difficult to get out of the debt situation that we're in, even with diplomatic and political, maneuverings. It's very difficult, Seth.
There's one other chart in that article, which I thought was really interesting. Is right below showing how China has been dumping its treasury holdings, right? Since really it started around 2015, 2016 is when they started kind of dropping. But then this next graph here, this is interesting. It says it's not just China. It says treasury holdings are relatively flat based on Fed custody data, while according to the IMF, the world's sovereign nations have been panic buying gold. So this chart, the green line shows the world treasury reserves, right? These are, from my understanding, this is the amount of treasuries that are out globally, not just in China. For instance, these are all the countries holding U.S. treasuries. But then if you look at around 2019, you can see that there's this massive spike increasing in gold. So I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they're printing so much money, they're dumping so much money into the market that a flat line of world treasury reserves is a really bad thing. That I'm guessing you'd want to see that line going up in some sort of correlation to the money printing. But then if you look at the fact that it's not going up, but gold reserves are skyrocketing. I mean, gold reserves have basically doubled since 2019. They've gone from roughly, I'm not sure exactly what number this indicates, whether it's, three, I'm not sure what it's measuring there, where it's like 3 million, it says 3 million ounces or whatever that, whatever that's measuring there, but it's up to almost 5.5. So it seems like they know what's coming. They can see what's coming. And nations that aren't run in the way our government is are telling their citizens. I'm hearing people talk about how, over, we're in Indonesia or Vietnam or China, and the government's telling us, buy precious metals. We're here in America. They're not saying that at all. They're saying, we're gonna pay your student loans back for you, if anything. So I think that something is coming, certainly. And if you put all this information together, it's hard to ignore. But I do just want to go back and just read one more time the words of that CEO of the you say this, he's the CEO of the second largest bank in Russia. Is that what you say?
Yeah, second largest bank in Russia.
Yeah, saying, I'm thoroughly convinced that America is inevitably headed for a serious economic crisis. The amount of debt currently held by the U.S. today has reached inconceivable astronomical levels, and the dollar's monopoly on the global stage is the only thing enabling the Americans to maintain such a level of debt. If the Chinese or the Arabs took their money out of the U.S., a complete collapse would ensue for the financial sector and the government. So, and those are significant words coming from a major banking player in one of the most major BRICS nations he's kind of saying, look, America, we got you by the balls. Like, we own all your debt, a large part of this debt. And if we dump it, your whole Ponzi scheme of money printing and everything is going to collapse. And it's not just your financial sector. The key there right there. And the government. So he's saying that basically these BRICS nations have the ability through their financial maneuvers to collapse our government. And this is really, really, really significant. This should be headline, on all the major media, talking about not this guy's words specifically, because, he's just one person of many globally, but this, you and I know he's not making things up. This is real. That would be the effect.
Well, look at the next line that he put when he says Costin added, right? If the West fails to revise its policy, I think that the move toward the collapse of the colonial system, the American way of life, our representative republic, right, will only accelerate. So he's saying that this financial collapse would also result in a change of he basically amplified the change in our government statement, right? He's expecting a complete overhaul. And what happens after this cycle of democracy, so to speak, kind of finishes its course? You change from a republic to a dictatorship, or a dictatorship to a republic. When it goes full cycle, this bondage that's created by putting too much power in the hands of the government, then it becomes too much for people, and it creates a cycle of slavery and bondage again. And so he's seeing the end of the American way, is what he's seeing from this financial collapse. Now, granted, just one guy, right? But a smart one who's probably in communication with Putin a lot, being the second largest bank in Russia. They know what their plan is to de-dollarize the world. And they're doing a really good job with it. How are they doing that? By allocating into mountains of gold, right? Giving themselves credibility, accountability, pulling out of these systems, these digital command and control type systems. And people think that Russia's like this horrible communist country, right? It's like, yeah, they're run by a ruthless dictator, but they've actually got more freedoms than America has in a lot of ways. I know people are going to throw rotten tomatoes at me, but you look at, I mean, when you look at Russia, it's like you assume that they're going to be run by a dictator. You look at America, and that's not the assumption, but we are, right? So that's more dangerous to me than somebody that's like, okay, what you see is what you get, where what you say is not what you get. There's things behind. I mean, this is how what America has turned into is weirdness and cloak and shadows and this move towards a complete globalist takeover of our way of life, Seth.
One thing I would say is that at least it seems like Putin is trying to protect his own nation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the thing, is that he's looking out, whereas here it just seems like these criminals that have taken over our government, they want our nation destroyed. Like they have no reason to protect our nation. It's actually part of their agenda to completely collapse it. But something I was just going to mention, just in talking about this overall shift, is that we look at that chart with the IMF showing the gold holdings and everything. We've been talking about this. They're talking about it, and let's use it's a little bit farther fetched with currency. Let's imagine food. It's almost like here in America. Let's imagine that we're getting ready to enter into a major famine globally.
Yeah.
And the BRICS nations know the famine is coming, and they're telling all of their citizens, stock up on rice, stock up on beans, stock up on wheat. You have their governments doing the same. You look at, which you have this. You look at China's buying of grains, and China, I think, has the largest grain reserve globally. But it's almost like all these countries are massively stocking up on grain, telling their citizens to stock up on grain. We have the leaders of these countries, and the leaders, like the major farming industries, saying, "Hey, everybody, hey, Americans, there's going to be a big famine. These are all the reasons that's going to be coming. Like, you better go buy some food." And yet here in America, our government's saying, "Folks, don't worry about it. We got you taken care of. There's going to be lots of food for everybody. Don't buy food." Yet the people like yourself and me, we're going to the rooftop saying, "Folks, there's a famine coming. Buy wheat. You get it now while you can." To me, that's the analogy of precious metals. It's like half the world sees it. You look at the buyings of these IMF, you look at these massive countries, they see what's coming, and they're stocking up like mad on precious metals. They're telling their citizens to stock up like mad on precious metals because they know what's coming. Whereas here in America, they're just lying through their teeth because they want us to suffer. They want financial collapse to come. They want us to be so poor and so broken that we're begging them for anything, and we'll take any kind of CBD system as long as it gives us that little bit of comfort and security at night. And this is what we're doing. This is why we're trying to get this message out there, is that we have to get out of the way. So, Kirk, precious metals, if folks want to work with you on precious metals, give me a quick kind of rundown, because I think a lot of folks have a lot of their assets sitting in IRAs, retirement accounts, 401ks, et cetera, and they feel like, well, it's kind of locked up until I retire. It's locked up for these reasons. For folks like that have been hesitant, first-time buyers or not, how does that work? If they want to say, think, you know what, I might as well move a third of that account over into silver because just in case, right? The same reason why if I have some extra money, I'm going to go buy some seeds, or I'm going to go buy some grain.
Yeah.
Walk us through that process.
So it's simple. You just call our office, 720-605-3900, and say Seth sent you. Or you go to the website link, goldwithseth.com. And what will happen is you will get scheduled. One of our schedulers will talk to you, ask you a few questions. What is it that Kirk and Seth talked about that caused you to want to reach out? What are your fears? What are your concerns? What are your dreams? And then we'll put you on the calendar with one of my amazing consultants who think like I do. They're bending over backwards to help and craft a strategy for success moving forward using precious metals to hedge against your other paper assets or things that you have, right? So then from that point, we fill out brief little forms, to move money from account to account, do an IRA rollover, or just, you wire the funds to us, and we call you when the funds arrive, and we confirm the allocation, and we buy it. Because it's never done. It's not a discretionary account. It's not our money. It's yours. I don't even believe it's your money. I believe it's God's money. So nothing is done without your permission. But my team will bend over backwards to do everything except fill out a couple small little forms. That's it. And so it's a real easy process. I've kept it simple on purpose and by design all of these decades to make the process easy. Because a lot of people, Seth, think gold and silver is hard. I've never done it before. But I don't know what to think. It's a little scary. It's not. To me, it's just like any other asset. It's like buying a stock, bond, a mutual fund, anything. Right. And so that's why we've made it really, really easy. It's just another thing that you can buy. And it's actually way easier than opening up a brokerage account, because it's a private transaction. You wire the funds, we ship you the metals, you have it. Right. And then when you sell it, you have to, basically report your capital gains on your tax return. But these are things that only in certain circumstances we have to report on liquidation. Right. It's like if you have 1,000 ounces or more, something like that. Right. But you always have to, as a person, as an individual, report your capital gains. And this is let the buyer beware. And the reason I brought that up is because there's so many dealers out there that are saying, oh, old rare coins, you don't have to ever report them. Wink, wink. It's like, no, that's wrong. You always have to report your gains. They're lying to you. And it's like, this is the kind of misconceptions that we want to educate every single client on, because gold and silver is so easy, so beneficial. When you look at what it's done over the last 2.5 months, it's up almost, well over 40%. When you look at what it's done over the last 3.5 years, up over 140%. I mean, these are amazing growth numbers that we should take advantage of to some level, to some degree, to hedge yourself against your other paper assets.
Well, thank you for walking us through that. So the phone number, the website will be in the description below the video or the podcast. Kirk, again, it's always great having you on. Thank you so much for doing what you're doing. Look forward to next week. Thank you again.
It's my pleasure. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Folks, at the very heart of our democracy lies a principle we hold sacred: free speech. It's the cornerstone that supports every freedom we cherish. Yet in today's digital age, discussions about our wealth, our rights, and our future are being silenced or overshadowed in mainstream narratives, leaving many feeling voiceless in conversations crucial to our financial independence and security. This is where wealth protection research steps in, armed with a mission that's never been more critical. Wealth Protection Research is not a financial advisory firm. They're defenders of free speech committed to giving a voice to the silenced. Wealth Protection Research tirelessly seeks out financial experts. These are the voices that challenge prevailing narratives, especially as we navigate the uncertainties of the 2024 election. Wealth Protection Research has created a 2024 Election Wealth Protection Report. This free report highlights the 3 best ideas for protecting and growing your money heading into the 2024 election. It contains ideas the mainstream media won't even touch, and listeners can get it completely free. So text IDEAS to 76626 to claim your free copy. If you believe in the sanctity of free speech and the importance of financial freedom, then act now. So text IDEAS to 76626 to claim your free copy of this 2024 Election Protection Report. It's time to widen the scope of what we're told, to hear the ideas the establishment does not think you can handle, and to take control of our financial destinies. So folks, today, text IDEAS to 76626 to claim your free copy.